Great. Now we are looking at the Internet and Governance Forum 2022. This is an event, a mini event organized by NetBlocks. And as you know, NetBlocks is a global watchdog organization that monitors cybersecurity and the governance of the Internet. NetBlocks' cost of shutdown tool is a data-driven online service that enables anyone, including journalists, researchers, advocates, policymakers, businesses, and others, to quickly, easily produce rough estimates of the economic cost of the internet disruptions. So the theme of this particular conversation that we are having is staying connected, and we are glad that you join us so that we can stay connected. Now, on this conversation with global cybersecurity experts, we have journalists here, human rights advocates, and researchers across Africa. We focus on the Internet and Governance Forum 2022, which is an open forum for dialogue on issues of internet censorship, rights online, surveillance, privacy, and community-centric governance approaches from the heart of the internet community as it adapts to new challenges. Of course, this is not new to the continent, where we've seen undemocratic governments around the world, especially in Africa, increasingly turning into internet blackouts and social media censorship to maintain their rule, stifle dissent and critical voices. They use this to prevent the dissemination of information and to impede organizational efforts. Africa has been one of the most affected by internet censorship by the proportion of the population. 8 out of 10 Africans have felt internet and social media shutdowns, according to Surfshark, which is a cybersecurity company and privacy protection toolset developed to help users to seamlessly control their online presence. A third of African countries have restricted access to internet services because of elections. In the first half of 2022, Surfshark, who is also here, registered about 66 internet blackouts in 6 countries and territories, including Burkina Faso and Sudan, which both experienced, as you may know, nationwide outages. There have been 91 cases of disruptions, out of which 41 are due to protests, 24 are due to elections, and 26 due to political turmoil. Now, generally, according to the report by Surfsharks, if we look at the social media in the first half of 2022, the most commonly restricted social media app is Facebook. 46% of the global population has been affected by the government-imposed Facebook restrictions over the past 7 years. Now, Twitter and WhatsApp follow the app, the latter being the most censored when you talk of the voice over IP app. And governments also target Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube as well. Now, we're having these conversations at a time the United Nations Annual Internet Governance Forum is being held this week in Ethiopia capital, Addis Ababa. Ironically, the Tigray region, which is home to more than 5 million people, has been mostly without internet, telecommunications, and banking services since war broke out between the federal government troops and forces led by the Tigray People's Liberation Front in November 2020. Aid workers and rights groups have told media organizations, and here I'm quoting AP news agency, that the communications blackout has hampered the delivery of aid to Tigray and fueled human rights abuses. Now, a ceasefire deal was signed between the two sides in South Africa earlier this month, and the parties committing to government, committing to restore basic services in Tigray, but the communications blackout has not yet been lifted, according to a report done by the AFP news agency. So Ethiopia has shut down the internet at least 22 times since 2016, according to the internet rights group Access Now. The blackout affecting the Tigray is the world's longest uninterrupted shutdown, according to this is Brett Solomon, who is the Access Now executive director. So this year's conference aims to build steps towards universal, affordable, and meaningful connectivity, especially in Africa, where 60% of the continent's 3 billion people are offline. This is what is being discussed in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Now, with the Tigray blackout still in place, the United Nations decision to hold this particular flagship event in Ethiopia has, of course, drawn criticism. Now, at that particular event, while addressing the opening ceremony of the Internet Forum on Tuesday, AFP quotes the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed appearing to defend the shutdown in Tigray and saying the internet has, and I quote, supported the spread of disinformation as Ethiopia dealt with armed rebellion in the northern part of the country, end of the quote. So, network data from NetBlocks has confirmed a significant disruption to internal service in Sudan from the morning of Tuesday, 25th October 2022, which affected cellular and some fixed line connectivity on multiple platforms. The incident lasted approximately 8 hours and came ahead of a planned pro-democracy protests to mark the first anniversary of the 2021 Sudanese military coup, when internet shutdowns were imposed to silence public dissent. So it's also happening elsewhere on the continent. So during the country's longest recorded network disruption, Sudan cut social media for 68 consecutive days to quell protests, with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp being restricted from 21st December 2018 up until February 26, 2019, according to NetBlock's internal measurements. As a result, Sudan ranks second most among the African countries in terms of intensity and severity of internet disruptions and social media restrictions, per the report done by Surfshark on the internet shutdown tracker. Away from Sudan, the same thing has also happened in Sierra Leone. So NetBlock metrics confirmed the nationwide disruption to internet service on multiple providers across Sierra Leone from the morning of Wednesday, 10th August 2022. Now here, internet was cut for 2 hours at noon, and then again overnight, amid reports of protests and clashes between the police and protesters in the capital city, Freetown, and other areas. So here, authorities subsequently denounced an attempt to overthrow the government and instead imposed a nationwide curfew, one of the measures that some governments in Africa are quickly running to whenever there is dissent. The same thing also happened to Zimbabwe this year. Network data from NetBlocks also confirmed a significant slowing of internet service for many users in Zimbabwe on Sunday, 20th February 2022. This was as a result of a major political opposition rally that was to be held in Harare. So the incident impacted multiple operators and prevented live streaming from the Yellow Sunday demonstration by the Citizens Coalition for Change Party, which sought to unseat the ZANU-PF, which is the ruling party there. Away from Zimbabwe, the same thing also happened to Burkina Faso. Again, data from NetBlocks and third-party traffic data confirmed significant disruptions to internet service in Burkina Faso. This is on the morning of 23rd January 2022. So the incident was as a result of reports of an uprising and gunfire at military camps. Authorities in the country initially had denied a military coup attempt. However, later on the following day, on a Monday, on a state TV, announced the resignation of President Roch Kabore and the suspension of the country's constitution by the army. So the Internet and Governance Forum, which is our hashtag is hashtag IUF, is a community-run parallel event that runs alongside the United Nations Internet Governance Forum. So the IUF is an open forum for dialogue on issues of internet censorship, rights online, surveillance, privacy, and community-centric governance approaches from the heart of the internet community as it adapts to new challenges. And that's why we have this particular conversation. I want to introduce to you our speakers this particular time. Allow me to introduce to you our host, which is the NetBlock, and allow me to bring to you Alp Toka. Alp Toka is the founder of global cybersecurity and connectivity watchdog organization NetBlocks.
Hello there.
Glad to have you here, Alp Toka.
Great to be here. Yeah, I'm using our organization account, so when you see the NetBlocks picture, you can know that it's me, Alp Toka from NetBlocks. Thanks very much, Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Alp. We also have Mabel Gebremedin, who is the leading human rights and advocate and the internet freedom activist, also a co-founder and president of Tigray Action Committee. Glad to have you here, Mabel.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you so much for including me.
I hope I pronounce your name well.
You were almost there, Kennedy. You were close. I
Thank
won't
you.
give you a hard time.
Thank you. Thank you. We're also joined by Elena Barskate, who is the research manager for cybersecurity company Surfshark, investigating digital freedom and privacy statistics, including the Internet Shutdown Tracker, which I had earlier mentioned that enumerates internet mass censorship cases. Glad to have you here with us, Elena.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Kennedy. Happy to be here. And I'm using the Surfshark account, so when you see it pop up, that's me talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, we also join with Isik Mata. Isik Mata is the director of research, and we will be having her to share with us briefly on what Ungovernance is, when it started, and also give us some situational statistics in other countries. Glad to have you here with us, Isik Mata.
Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you very much.
Later on, we'll be joined by Tekle Heimainot Wildemeichel, who is also a Tigray Research Fellow at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, expert on SDGs and conservation politics in Africa. Now, so we have a number of things that we'll be discussing here. We'll also open the platform to you to ask questions or seek clarity from our panelists here. And we just have one request. Let's always be respectful whenever we get an opportunity
services. If we zoom in into Africa, we can see that it is the most affected continent out of all of the world. Uh, 34 out of 54 countries have blocked the internet or social media in some way or another, with at least 90 recorded instances since 2015. And this was especially happening in the circumstances of political turmoil or elections, as you mentioned previously. The most recent, as mentioned at the start of our talk, was Sudan, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, and of course Ethiopia, where the blockings are happening right now as well. That means that 8 out of 10 felt internet or social media shutdowns. That's an enormous number. That's more than 1 billion people being affected. In fact, 1/3 of African countries have restricted access to internet services amidst elections. And that's very horrible to see because it endangers democracy and the right to free public debate, reduces the power of voters and journalists. You can see that a large chunk of Africa's population has not been able to communicate during elections, which is especially dreadful. Now, when talking about Ethiopia, Ethiopia ranks first in Africa based on the number of internet disruptions, and it accounts to at least 10% of all Africa's cases. All of them also happen amidst the circumstances of political turmoil or protests, and as I said, some continue to this day in Tigray. We also, besides the internet shutdown tool, every year we also track countries' progress in terms of digital quality of life. And we'll look at things such as internet quality, cybersecurity, infrastructure, and so on. And what we see is that Ethiopia also ranks third last out of all countries of the Digital Quality of Life Index 2022, and second last in Africa. This just proves yet again that it's very hard to access the internet in the country. As of 2022, we see that only 18% of people use the internet in Ethiopia, and with the internet restrictions that are happening on top of this, it really compromises the accessibility even more. And besides these factors, we see that internet affordability is also a very important factor, which really highlights the divide that is happening in terms of Africa. We can see that when it comes to internet freedom, especially, some regions really develop quicker than others. Lower than the average income countries, which Ethiopia and some of African countries are also part of, work 3 times more for 3 times slower internet than higher income ones. Africa still faces the most significant digital divide, as when we compare the numbers from the continent that has the most affordable internet, Oceania, internet in Africa is 83% less affordable than there. This is a really um, a very horrible thing because very little people can afford it. The quality is low, but also it's very expensive to afford. So we can see that the gap between these two continents has widened by more than 20 percentage points. So it continues expanding. It just doesn't stop there and improve, but it actually has expanded since last year when we look at the data from the Digital Quality of Life Index. While in some countries, internet takes only seconds to afford, in some it can take even work weeks. So, for example, in UK, for 1 gigabyte of mobile data, people have to work less than a minute, and for broadband, a bit more than an hour. In Ethiopia, people have to work for 1 gigabyte of data 1.5 hours, and for broadband, almost 2 work days. That's an enormous difference. And when we look at bandwidth, at the internet speed, in Ethiopia, broadband and mobile internet is slow. It's around 26 megabytes per second for mobile internet, and you likely wouldn't have any trouble streaming a movie, but you would struggle to have a video conferencing call in many instances. So when you take into account the disruptions and the whole instability of the network, this is even more severe. So these are just some of the findings from our data and what we found in terms of Ethiopia, in terms of Africa, in terms of the difficult situation that we have in Africa and worldwide. And I hope it provided some insight for you all. So thank you for the mic.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and we really appreciate it, Elena. Now, I had not introduced Tekle Minot. Tekle, glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you, Kennedy.
Thank you so much. For those who are asking, Tekle Minot, I'm struggling to pronounce the second word, but
just pronounce Tekle, the 5 first letters of my name. So Tekle.
Okay, thank you so much. So Tekle is a Tigrayan Research Fellow at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and also an expert on SDGs and conservation politics in Africa. Let me begin with you, Tekle. The 17th Internet Governance Forum is taking place in Ethiopia under the overarching theme, Resilient Internet for a Shared, Sustainable and Common Future. Quite an irony. What is your immediate thoughts on this?
Yeah, like you said, quite an irony, and I've been writing about it like for several months now, trying to point out how ironical it is to host an event of this importance in a country that has really weaponized the internet and the broader communication system to commit atrocities as we know it in Tigray. And when we, I think I should give a little bit of background or like story into what it looks like to be in Tigray at the moment, or for the last 25 months. So we have seen horrible atrocities taking place in Tigray region, where you have about 7 million people that have been under sealed off skies, like with no communication, with no access to internet, telephone, mail service, or any services, and with all kind of blockade, so total siege. And we have atrocities that amount to genocide. We have about, I mean, it's a very conservative estimate, but we know that about 600,000 people or civilian Tigrayans may have perished in relation to with relation to the war and atrocities associated with it. And we have absolutely horrifying stories of people going through a nightmare in the region. We have millions of people being displaced from their homes, and we have all kinds of stories that show that the situation in Tigray is horrible. And the United Nations or the Internet Governance Forum decided to host an event in Ethiopia, where the internet and the communication system is a weapon to hide atrocities, to propagate and to cause violence. We have like, we are not talking about an ordinary government in Ethiopia. We have a government that uses the communication system to facilitate violence, to cover up violence, to cover up atrocities. And then you have the United Nations, and one of the most important bodies in the United Nations hosting an event in this country. This is absolutely unbelievable, and this is not inconsistent with the way the United Nations has been responding to the crisis in Tigray, all the way from the office of the Secretary General to the offices in Addis, the UN offices in Ethiopia have been, to sort of say, like, complicit to what's going on in Tigray. We have the Secretary General himself denying the presence of Eritrean troops who have committed atrocities beyond imagination. Despite overwhelming evidence, he has continuously tried to defend the Ethiopian government's actions in Tigray. And then you have, when evidence of atrocities emerge, you have the United Nations offices usually trying to sort of downplay, and that has been documented, broadly documented by different people. For example, former Minister of Women and Children of Ethiopia, Sultan Ahmed, in her open letter after her resignation because of her disagreement with the Ethiopian government's handling of the crisis, she mentions about the how the United Nations failed to address the crisis as it should be. And she writes, quote, the UN was born out of the horrors of the Second World War rather than upholding its mandate and recognizing the spirit that is never again, under which the UN was founded. We have top UN officials scheming to seductions of the Ethiopian government and accepting invitations to lavish resorts in exchange for silence. So clearly indicating the complicity from at the level of the United Nations. And this complicity is never nowhere more vividly visible than the way the Internet Governance Forum decided to host its event in Addis. And this event is supposed to be, I mean, the IGF is supposed to promote better and wider access to the internet, but then you have the event being hosted in the country, as Elena has tried to explain earlier, in a country that has the lowest records of internet use and the lowest records because of the government's intentional disruptions and government's intentional, I mean, sort of disinvestments because it sees it as a way of controlling the public. And among the broader themes of the conference, you have one of them is like connecting all people and safeguarding the human rights, and the other one is avoiding internet fragmentation. And these are not some things that Ethiopia is known for. Like Ethiopia is not known for connecting people and safeguarding human rights. It's in fact using them to violate human rights. And to hold this event in Addis is just contradiction at a different level. And it's contradiction on two levels. You could see that, for example, from the director of the International Telecommunications Union, who is present at the event, tweeted yesterday saying, "I'm glad to be here." And she had this slogan. She says, "Leave no one behind." And clearly, she doesn't say anything about the fact that 7 million people, just 1 hour north of Addis, are under complete communication blackout, and she doesn't even bother to mention that. And they are clearly left behind. When you see it from the other side, you have this event being hosted by Ethiopian regime, and where you have the Ethiopian regime having the opportunity to, like a regime officials having the opportunity to disinform the gurus of the internet of the world, and that is really horrible. Like for example, you don't have the voices of the Tigrayans being heard in that event. You don't have voices of other Ethiopians who are suppressed by this regime to speak up and to say anything about it. And part of this suppression you could see from the way things were handled at the beginning of the conference yesterday, where they were confiscating gadgets from people who may possibly speak up against the government. So this is really a contradiction. Thank you, Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you bring me to the point made by the Access Now's executive director, Brett Solomon, saying that the blackout affecting Tigray is the world's longest uninterrupted shutdown. But as you mentioned, of course, and for the purposes of our audience here, the Minister for Innovation and Technology, Bilit Mola, who is Ethiopia's minister, has been quoted by the AFP news agency saying that the government of Ethiopia is designing a package that's not only about internet resumption, but the resumption of everything, because this is what he says people need as a government. Let me come to you, Maebel. Tekle has mentioned something here. It's quite an irony, of course, but now that UN, of course, knows what has been happening, and we've seen all the kind of responses, the kind of requests they've been making to allow humanitarian access and so forth, don't you think this could have done deliberately to host the event there?
Excuse my voice. It's still very early here in DC, so I'm a bit tired. And you almost had my name right, Kennedy. That was so close this time.
No worries.
It's okay. It's Mabel, Mabel Government. I do think that it's deliberate on the UN's part. They've done a lot, as has been mentioned already. To they're essentially complicit at this point in the genocide and the blackout that's happening in Tigray. They've done very, very little to stop it. They've done very little to aid Tigrayans, and they've done a lot to um, downplay what's happening in Tigray. And so I would imagine that to be deliberate. There was a leak that Omna Tigray published early last year where the UN offices in Ethiopia were talking about what was happening to Tigray's women and downplaying it. They were joking, they were laughing, they were essentially just saying that it wasn't true or they were going to move around it. A lot of different things. You can actually go onto Omna Tigray and find it. You can Google it and just type in Omna Tigray UN leak and you'll find it. But the UN has been complicit in a lot of the crimes that have happened in Tigray, including the blackout. They've done nothing to help Tigrayans. The most recent thing that they've done is send members and continue to have the event in Addis. So yeah, I would imagine that to be deliberate, and I'm comfortable in stating that.
Thank you so much, Maebel. Let me bring in Al Toka. Al, what did NetBlocks observe technically in Tigray in November 2020?
Yeah, no, the technical context of these disruptions is very interesting. We're a network observatory. We track internet connectivity around the world in real time. And I just want to take you back for a moment to November 2020. So this is November 4, 2020. And we witnessed something quite remarkable, very distressing as well. So in context, this was just the time at which um, Abiy Ahmed was in the process of essentially declaring war on the Tigray region. And what we saw was a very specific sequence of events that led to the ongoing internet shutdown that remains in place to this day. We have a report on this, which is up on our website at netbox.org. But I'm just going to dive into the timeline of that day. So this is just over 2 years ago, and we tracked this in real time, and we're able to report it very rapidly. So on this day, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had announced that a supposed red line had been crossed and that military action was being taken to save the country from restive groups. But a very interesting element, a technical element that we observed through our timeline is that the region of Tigray was actually shut off just before he made this announcement. So many people didn't actually know what was going on. The blackout was the main problem in that region, which really tells us that even in this world order that Abiy Ahmed has sought to create, where he declares what he sees as a righteous war, he was declaring this while simultaneously cutting off the people who probably most need to know what's going on. And this obviously is something that leads to massive confusion and distress in the early hours of the destruction. And I think that this element of the shutdown and how it started hasn't really been explored so far. This isn't to say that Ethiopia doesn't shut off the internet in other times. We saw that widespread internet shutdown was imposed after the death of activist singer Hachalu, for example, in 2020 also, and that there were also blackouts in 2019. I mean, this is really a problem that comes part and parcel with Abiy Ahmed, it seems. This didn't, there were censorship issues before in the country, but it has hugely escalated with the current government.
And perhaps just a follow-up question. Those who are here perhaps will want to know, why do you think turning to internet blackouts and social media censorship is becoming so convenient target for some African governments?
Africa has become a hotspot for this kind of disruption. Obviously, it happens around the world. Iran is a huge um, internet censorship and blackout hotspot. There were major disruptions during the Masa Amini protests, and there are disruptions that continue following that. But if you look at African countries, you see certain patterns. One of the patterns we noticed is that neighboring countries shut off the internet. So one will see from the other and will basically follow suit. We don't know why they do this, but they see that one country is getting away with it, and then they just do the same. Another pattern that we've seen is that internet shutdowns are also imposed during elections. This is a huge problem because those populations are left offline. But the two countries that have been at the forefront of this cycle, in second place, for example, by Surfshark's own table of metrics, is Sudan. Obviously, with the military coup and the distressing situation there, that's a huge problem. And then you have Tigray and Ethiopia, which just comes up top, just because it is ongoing and the government can basically get away with it. You can see now that you have the UN actually hosting the Internet Governance Forum while this is happening in real time concurrently in that region. If governments can be seen to get away with it, then it will just become more commonplace. It's a very dangerous approach to internet governance and governance in general.
Wow. Let me bring in Elena. In 2021, there is a documentation of 6 election-related internet shutdowns in 6 countries. Here we're talking about Chad, the Republic of the Congo, Niger, Uganda, and Zambia. In your reports, what does this kind of disruptions have on millions of people in these countries?
Yeah, we've seen that the largest number of internet censorship cases in Africa have happened in Ethiopia, Chad, Congo, in the past 7 years. So these are the 3 most affected countries, as well as Sudan. The most recent that we have happened in October in Sudan, in Somalia in August, in Sierra Leone also in August, Zimbabwe just at the beginning of the year, and Burkina Faso. So this really impacts many people in a horrible way, and as I mentioned before, it reduces the free public debate during the elections, the political turmoil. So these are kind of what we were able to pick out from the news reports and to track them. In terms of specific cases, I think Alp could really get into that more, but this is something that we've been monitoring and we found.
Yeah, and people who've not been spared from these shutdowns are journalists as well. When governments shut down internet, it becomes completely difficult for them to cover. And at this point, I want to bring in Isik. Isik, of course, we've seen journalists, researchers, advocates, policymakers, businesses being victims of organized trolls online, and as well as surveillance for that matter. There are those who are saying this looks like organized in a way to try to either one, to discredit journalists online, or to discredit projects or activities that are being done online. How does this put them at risk? Isik, unmute your mic. Alp, you can take that.
Hi, yeah. I think Isik is having mic problems. I mean, you see that digital spaces are being used really at the forefront of means to suppress journalists and journalism. It used to be the case that this was an offline fight, it would be the press, it would be going out to print every day, and that oppression would happen at the same pace as traditional media. But obviously, over the last couple of decades, that has completely changed. Now, print basically doesn't matter. You have different formats, and online on social media, you see that a combination of these tools, these tactics, including, as you said, surveillance, also hacking of phones. You see that there are 0 days, and these are marketed. These are actually sold for millions of dollars to the highest bidder, so that these governments can actually hack people's phones until companies like Google and Apple actually fix the bug. So it's become an entire ecosystem, and that shows no sign of slowing down. The dynamics are also changing. I think that right now, for example, with Twitter and the complete privatization of the platform, journalism is changing once again. You see that for years and years, media has taken for granted a platform that is perhaps slightly left leaning in the US context, but that has been stable and ever present. Now that we're seeing almost an exodus from some groups, and also other groups are just starting to re-enter the Twitter space. So you see this shift politically. That also creates instability. It means that identities are harder to track. So if you have people switching to decentralized networks, you then have to find who they are, and that creates room for impersonation. I suspect that impersonation is perhaps the big up and coming risk, and it's especially so for countries in Africa, countries in the Middle East, countries that perhaps have developing economies, so aren't well represented and don't have the power to pressure social media companies to assist them during a crisis. So it's a time of real change at the moment, and uh, yes, we've seen that a lot of these techniques like phone hacking have become established, and techniques to, target independent journalists and independent media and silence them have been there. But we're also seeing that there's this new opportunity, but also new challenge when it comes to really 2022, 23, when we're going to see this new upheaval of platforms.
Kennedy, would it be okay if I say something really quickly?
Adoption of data localization laws in Africa. Across Africa, the proliferation of digital technologies is quickly being seen as a perfect opportunity by governments to intercept communications and also enforce surveillance, which in one way violates people online rights and privacy. I want to come to you, Elena. How significant is this in violation to freedom of expression, association, and access to information online?
I think Mabel wanted to speak before. Maybe we should give the mic to her for the moment.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure if my internet is acting up, but I missed half of that. It got very silent. And so I thought it was a moment where I could say something. So I don't want to interrupt you, and you're welcome to answer the question.
Elena, can you go?
Freedom of expression is, of course, a human right. It's very important during protests, elections, and so on. So the fact that it is censored by internet shutdowns is, of course, very detrimental for the country and the people living in it. So that's something that I would have to say for the topic. In terms of numbers, as mentioned before, they are huge. 1/3 of African countries have restricted access to internet services. And in selections, 8 out of 10 Africans have felt the effect of internet and social media shutdowns. All of those people, all of those people's freedom of speech, freedom of expression have as a result of internet censorship.
I'll talk. Of course, this is a big issue here. You remember we've had reports on how journalists are being being surveillance is being carried on journalists, even those who have critical voices and those who try to question what governments are doing outside here. And some actually there is some unorthodox means that are being adopted in terms of adopting digital technologies, but not just digital technologies. We're also seeing the adoption of data localization laws across Africa. I know there are a number of countries that have not yet adopted this, but we are seeing where personal data is, the governments are taking personal data, and this is being seen as a way of trying to do away with people, intrude into people's privacy. Is this a new frontier where we're likely to see governments, instead of perhaps shutting down internet, going straight to the people who try to criticize them online?
This is a great question. And data localization is a difficult issue to address because there are rights and wrongs when it comes to this policy. Now, on one extreme, we can take, for example, Iran, which you could take as the absolute expression of data localization, or even China, where you have the country building its own national internet. So it's not anymore a concept of data localization. Everything is isolated, it's a splinter net, and you basically have a separate internet. Certainly in China, North Korea, completely, it's an intranet, and also Iran, which has a very selective filter that it can almost allow a bit of internet to flow through its central gateways, but then switch that off at will during protests. So when it comes specifically to data localization, we're talking about the data that is typically hosted on Western companies' servers that is traditionally, you might look at, say, your Twitter data or your Facebook data. And then you have governments saying, look, this is our citizens' data. We believe that it needs to be hosted in the country, uh, purportedly, so that the country's laws can apply to it. Now, this can become a problem depending on how data is regulated and governed in that country. In the base case scenario, this can potentially be a good thing if the country's laws are more reliable and more trusted than the laws in the country in which the social media company is based. Now, this may work if you're based in, I don't know, France or the UK or Switzerland or something, uh, but the challenge is that it's not always the case. And if the data is localized to a country which has a poor rule of law, then essentially the government has access to all those messages, all those profiles, everything about you. And we're not just talking about your social graph, what companies tend to analyze and sell. We're actually talking about very personal and private messages, for example, that even what you say, how when you speak, potentially recordings of your calls, anything that isn't end-to-end encrypted. So uh, data localization is generally a risk, and it's problematic, and it needs to be done very carefully. But there is one solution to this, and it is end-to-end encryption. If that authentication identity is separated from the platform, if your data doesn't go to the data center in the first place, then you're protected. And that's, for example, why WhatsApp is actually quite a secure option, despite being owned by a company that does track users' data. And it's also one of the more interesting proposals that Elon Musk has made in terms of encrypting Twitter's DMs. So it's a real problem. I don't think data localization is going to go away in Africa or elsewhere, but we do need to push for protections, and also technical options to try to mitigate the risk from that.
Thank you so much, Alps. And perhaps for those who are wondering, we have a number of countries, of course, in Africa where there's justification for surveillance, but is also specified under law. And we're talking about countries like Benin, Togo, Niger, Morocco, and even Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as Togo. So if that has to be done, then there are reasons that are provided under law, under the pretext of preservation of national security, and also investigation of crimes, terrorism, and other activities that are seen as perhaps could undermine public peace and public order. And for those who are joining us at this particular time in time, we are discussing the IUF 2022. This is Internet and Governance Forum 2022 minis event, and this is organized by NetBlocks, which is a global watchdog organization that monitors cybersecurity and governance of the internet. And the reason why we're having this is because we are seeing these efforts from governments across Africa trying to stifle critical voices, to stifle dissent, and also contain, try to ensure that, that there are no people trying to say contrary to what the government is saying, the governments are saying. But it also coming at a time when we are having the Internet Governance Forum currently taking place in Ethiopia, where that has been organized by the United Nations. And for us here, we're looking at critical voices that need to be heard here, because if you're talking of a resilient internet for a shared, sustainable, and common future, then of course you have to bring in people who actually you have to bring in the internet community that is so critical online. We will be opening this conversation in the next 2 or 3 minutes. You want to ask a question, you proceed. You'll have 30 seconds to do so. Or you want to seek clarity, you'll have 30 seconds to do so. But allow me to pick Mabel. Mabel, I don't know if you can hear me. You're struggling with your internet.
No, I can hear you now. I don't know what happened earlier, but it's cleared up.
Thank you. There is this particular issue around online trolls, and when I'm talking of online trolls, I'm framing it under online rights, where we are seeing people who have critical voices online being stifled in one way or the other. You are talking about what is happening that should not be happening, but then people, because they align themselves to regimes, are unwilling to listen to critical voices. How can we remedy this? Is there a way we can remedy this? Because there seems to be organized trolls online here. Organized trolls online here. Some people having more than 10 or 20 accounts. You put out a tweet, they descend on that tweet like, I don't know, I don't want to mention it, but they descend on your tweet and it's all just negative. How difficult can this become?
It can become very difficult, and I can speak from personal experience. I will tweet something mundane about Tigray. I'll tweet regularly, what are you doing for Tigray today, as a reminder for Tigrayans that live in the diaspora in the West and who have access to the internet and Twitter, just to do something for our families, just a quick reminder. And the responses that tweet gets are trolls. The majority of the people that respond and comment on that tweet will be trolls, and they'll be very negative. They'll say, what I'm doing for Tigray today is praying that you all die, or things of that nature. And that can be very, it can make you feel like there's no point, there's no reason to do anything when you see a lot of that. And that's the majority of things that you'll see under my tweets. And so I've had to close comments, or close it so that only the people that I follow are able to respond, which is disappointing, but that's the reality of it. The thing about the trolls, though, there are troll farms. They're supported by these regimes, specifically the Eritrean regime. They've been doing this for a very long time. In fact, they have had celebrities troll us. Due to the internet blockade, we have not been able to get our stories heard from Tigray. Instead, the stories that we've been able to receive and hear and report have originally, most of them were coming from Tigrayans who fled to Sudan. And there was about 70,000 Tigrayans that were able to flee into relative safety in Sudan. But once they started sharing their stories and it started getting international headlines, the Ethiopian government shut down those borders, so not allowing any Tigrayan out. And so the borders were closed pretty quickly, I would say probably by December of 2020. And so Tigray has been under a border blockade, under a telecommunications internet blockade, a complete siege, no aid. in very little people out for 2 years, a little over 2 years now. So it's been very hard to get our stories out. And so the stories that were coming out were from refugees, and then they were from soldiers who were committing the crimes. And so these ENDF soldiers would commit the crimes, leave Tigray, and then post them to social media and other parts of the internet out of pride. They were so happy of what they have done. There's video of these soldiers having men and priests and young men, children, bent over and shooting them from the back, laughing about it, being joyous about it. There's a lot of evidence out there in the world from the people who are committing the crimes. And so that is the only way that we're able to actually get our stories out. And so what these trolls were doing, specifically Tiffany Haddish, was on Clubhouse asking us to provide her evidence as to where the dead bodies are. If this is happening, if this genocide is actually happening, where are the dead bodies? And so we've had to deal with a lot of those type of comments, a lot of those type of trolls. And when the Ethiopian government is continuing this internet shutdown, it makes it that much harder for us to counter, although we have the evidence. The evidence is there. We have so much evidence. In fact, there's CNN video of Tigrayan bodies that were dumped and tortured in the river on the border to Sudan. There's so much evidence, yet trolls have these sayings and these arguments, and a lot of the issues are due to the internet blockade. And so if we had access to our family members, mind you, I'm speaking from personal experience. My entire family is trapped in Tigray. My father is trapped in Tigray. All my grandmothers, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. I have very little family in the West. And so I have not been able to speak to them either over the phone or through the internet. There is no FaceTime. There is no, I don't know. I don't know who's alive, who's not. If the internet were available, I would have a little bit more clarity on that. And so the trolls understand all of this, and they're taking advantage of it. And it's very hard for some of our community members to be on social media. It's caused a lot of mental health issues, because not only are we being traumatized by all of the trauma porn that we're seeing, but we're also being traumatized by the trolls who are laughing at it, who are telling us that we're wrong. There's one specific account that will tweet under anything that I'm associated with and just say, it's like constant laughing emojis or gifs or calling me a loser and whatnot. And I personally don't care, but others do. It affects others. So I think the only way to counter trolls, to answer your question, is either to turn your comments off, to not read them, read the comments that they provide, or just, understand that this is what they're out here to do, is to troll you. There's no real, they're not trying to provide any honest information. They're not trying to have an honest conversation. They're here to troll you. And so I think those were really the only counters that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madel. Technically, I know your hand is up, but of course, this is something that you've also experienced. Journalists have also experienced the same, because people consistently want to hear what is sweet to their ears. They do not want to hear what the other side says about the same thing. What's your take on this, Tekle?
Thank you, Kennedy. I think I'm gonna just add to what Mabel said before me. Trolls, I mean, we have been going through this a lot for the last 2 years, and trolls are not necessarily random people or random robots doing this, but organized, fitting with sort of like propaganda campaigns that are organized from Addis and Asmara, and you could see the pattern of commenting changing from time to time, depending on what the Ethiopian or the Eritrean governments want to achieve. So, and these are not like individuals commenting on our social media engagements. It's usually by states, organized by states, and there are like evidence of like the Ethiopian Information Security Agency producing accounts mainly intended to do that. And Facebook had, for example, had taken down a lot of them. But before I just leave, I want to mention, as I said earlier, about the irony of hosting the event in Addis. And we've been discussing with some people who are going to the IGF, and one of the comments that we often get when we ask them why this was organized in Addis is that it will be an opportunity for the Ethiopian government, for the UN and international community to press the Ethiopian government to change its behavior. And this is, we think, is very nice, naive thing to think about Ethiopia. And we have seen, for example, the Ethiopian government organizing the what was Food and Nutrition Security Conference in February this year. And I don't think that has changed anything in the way the Ethiopian government behaves in terms of food security and nutrition. In fact, I think hundreds of thousands of people have died because of food hunger and starvation since then, and that hasn't made the Ethiopian government sympathetic to the people affected by famine, and that is imposed by itself. So to think that hosting an event of this magnitude in Addis would change the behavior of the Ethiopian state is just to be naive. And that's and you could also see that this event is being used to gaslight us. Like a lot of the trolls are now switching to telling us that we were wrong about talking about Tigray and the crisis in Tigray, and that the world doesn't see our plea, that the world doesn't care about us, and that the Ethiopian government has won. And that's actually true. The Ethiopian government has won, won, and advised in the wrong way. So that's how I see trolls and what they are doing to us.
Thank you so much, Tekle. Before I bring in the audience to this conversation, I want to bring in Altoka. Altoka, of course, when you look at what is happening, what the Keep It On coalition has been monitoring around across the world, and Africa is not an exception. You obviously will understand that these internet blackouts and social media censorship is primed at stifling dissent and critical voices. But of course, for journalists and also human rights crusaders, there must be also a way on how they can handle this, right?
Well,
Is
right.
there a
So
way?
you have, yeah.
Is there a way we can circumvent this and just go about our work?
So this is the big question. When the internet is cut, what can we do to get back online? Now, it really depends on the type of internet cut or disruption or shutdown, and we see a whole range of different types of information blackouts that are used. Now, if it is primarily affecting social media platforms, if it's a partial restriction that is essentially filtering of certain platforms, then there are a few options. You can use a VPN service to tunnel around the restriction. And, this isn't too hard to do. You can install an app, and then you can actually regain access to that service. Now, if the internet is completely cut, things start to get interesting because you don't have anything. There's no water running from the tap, so you don't have anything to work with, and you really need to get connectivity through an alternative means that typically isn't in the control of the state. So we've seen a few approaches to this, and we've also tested a few in our labs. So one of them, if you still have an old modem lying around, sometimes you can actually dial in if you can still find a number. It's very slow, but you can try using dial-up to at least get a emergency tweet out or get some very basic connectivity. It's very difficult to use the internet like this, but it is an option. You can try to get your hands on satellite internet. You have the Starlink service now, which is being launched in various countries. It's quite expensive, but if you're fortunate enough to get that, then you can also share it with your community and set up a kind of community network that isn't reliant on government networks. We've seen that there's a lot of success with swapping SIM cards. It sounds really basic, but if you have a mobile phone and you happen to have particularly an international SIM card, it turns out that the cell operators have contractual obligations to keep international customers connected. So in an emergency, just having a SIM card from a neighboring country can give you access through the cell towers that you wouldn't normally have as a citizen. We've even seen that people have been able to connect through Wi-Fi, long-range Wi-Fi for those landlocked countries. There's this whole range of options, but there's no perfect solution. And unfortunately, you just have to try to find a solution. We've seen that people will even put content on USB sticks and drive to the neighboring town just to get that information out, because it's so vital to be able to share those informations and the authentic version of events during an internet blackout.
Thank you so much, Alf. Now, I want to bring in the audience to seek clarity and also ask questions. But before we do that, allow me to request you to kindly follow our panelists here. Keep in touch with them, especially on the issues around internet shutdown, censorship, surveillance, and intrusion into privacy. So kindly follow NetBlock, follow them, all of them here, and I'm sure you will be having a massive network with yourself, and also follow each other in the audience as well. Let me bring in now the audience to ask questions. When I say questions, I mean questions. We do not expect you to speak like a minute. So I'm only going to give you in the audience 30 seconds each to ask your question, seek clarity, and then we proceed from there. You can perhaps direct that particular question to whoever you want to direct. So if you go beyond 30 seconds, of which I'm counting, I'm just going to drop you immediately. And of course, let's stick to the conversation that we have here. We do not want to entertain side shows and other things that are not important to this conversation. Let me begin with you, Shewit.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to ask a question. I guess my question is for the person who just recently spoke with NetBlocks. In the case of Tigray, where everything is pretty much shut down and Tigray is still backwards, they still have landlines. But even, and at some point, the landlines were working internally, not anymore. But if you were, for instance, in Aksum, you could call Maqala or from Maqala to Aksum. But my question is from people like us who are outside, the only way to help them, what is a cost, what is a minimum platform or a connectivity method that we could use to help them? One of them sat phone, but is there anything other that you propose that you know of out there that we could help people communicate with their loved ones? Thank you. Over to you. And thanks for hosting this platform.
Thank you so much, Shewit. Alt Stoker, you can take that.
Right. Yeah, no, great question, Showit. And this is a very specific problem space, and there are solutions that will work and won't work. Now, one of the problems, Starlink, for example, isn't active in the region at the moment, and that may change, and that would change the problem space. But until that can be solved, I think it is worth trying to raise this. Obviously, there's no point in begging. Elon Musk will do it when he gets time to do it. Presumably, it's a question for the company, and you can't push too much. But there are other options. Now, sat phones do work, and while they aren't that fast, uh, they are fairly cost effective, and because of competition, they're going down as well. So if you can get one of these devices out, they're quite small, and getting them in the hands of someone, perhaps someone who's able to defend themselves. This is really important when we're talking about equipment, hardware. Is if you put it in the hands of a very at-risk activist, then if it could cause problems for them just to own this equipment if they get stopped and searched. So whether it's a lawyer or at least a journalist or a community leader who is able to justify that and explain why they're using it, then using a traditional 80s style or 90s style sat phone is an option, and you can actually hook this up to a laptop or with some devices even to a phone, and actually get some degree of internet connectivity. The other interesting option is to try to hop through the telephone system. So what you'd do is you'd get a modem, an old style modem rack that people could dial into, which would be one of the regions that people can make phone calls to. You wouldn't get great speed, but you would get some connection for data that could then be routed to the outside. And that's a fairly technical project. It's going to probably have limited reach in terms of how many people would figure out how to use it, but it can create a lifeline. Unfortunately, as far as we know, there aren't many great, hacks involving SIM cards or Wi-Fi, so there's no quick fix solution. But I would say those two areas are worth explaining. And one thing to avoid is, don't spend time trying to find software solutions. There are some projects which claim that there will be a Bitcoin or blockchain internet connectivity solution, and they'll be soliciting for funds and donations. And at the moment, because the region is completely cut off, these really won't work at that scale.
Thank you so much, Toka. Let me bring in JJ.
Hey, thanks for setting all this up. This is a great conversation. I think I just wanted to ask, in addition to NetBlocks, I really appreciate that last answer, but one of the things I'm wondering is, can the international community push for the same human rights protection of internet access that we've seen them push for in Ukraine, for regional ownership of internet connection? And when we see these types of genocides, would you agree that it's important that there becomes a standard from the international community for owning internet access from these ethnic minorities?
Right. JJ, no, that's a really important question. Now, the problem is the international frameworks are really weak, and governments don't want to impose even basic expectations on other countries because they're afraid that other countries will then impose similar rules and regulations against them. So there's a bit of a sovereignty problem here, in that governments may tweet and complain and express concern. That's a classic one. You don't actually see governments applying the force of law or even technical mechanisms unless there is actual conflict. So, like you said, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, the international community has been rapid to respond. Companies have been almost falling over themselves to cut off Russia. But that's happened because it's been accepted as it's been approved. It's been given that element of approval, and governments in the West aren't prepared to do the same thing for countries in Africa that switch off the internet, even at scale, because I think that they haven't. They're afraid that if they get involved and they do that kind of take that kind of action, that they'll be called out. So I think it's really important to ask for it and say, we want this. We want to see a Ukraine model, a Russia model being applied here, and actually make this case not through emotional arguments, but through technical arguments. So I really like this idea that you've presented. Go with facts, go with data, and argue that this can improve the situation. Also show that the problem is spreading and that if action isn't taken, it's going to affect the bottom lines, economic impacts, economic harm. It's going to harm those countries' ability to relate to other countries as well. So, as a technologist, I would definitely advocate that kind of softly spoken technological approach to making that argument, in addition to the human rights argument, which is obviously very clear there already, as Mabel has technically explained. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Altoka. We proceed with James Marty.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to get a few pointers on the plans of the international community to to develop frameworks, or if there are even frameworks in place to sort of decentralize the power of government to, just easily switch on and switch off internet access, and then shut down certain platforms, all in the name of protecting a certain narrative. And I take a cue from even the NSAS movement that led to the ban on Twitter, and several other examples that have been raised in this conversation. I want to know if there are frameworks to sort of like make it more complicated for governments to just switch on and switch off, or if there are risk factors that pertain to giving government that total control to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Soka, you
Sure.
can take that, and of course, we've not yet seen a robust approach by the international community, because the tendency of governments in Africa switching on and switching off internet has been so much convenient. It's like they just have a button, do it when you want and do it when you think you've accomplished the desire or the need. So are we seeing much of the robust approach from the international community, and even the social media giants or the tech giants? Because as you remember, we've had same problem with Nigerian government banning Twitter and placing on table their own demands which have to be followed by Twitter. Is this something that perhaps might change as we go forward?
The problem is that, okay, you look at ECOWAS, for example, which has been fairly outspoken against the practice of internet shutdowns, but then that only has jurisdiction in a certain number of countries. And moreover, even when ECOWAS rules a judgment against an internet shutdown, the country just does it anyway. So they have very limited ability to impose fines or actual um, measures that will affect the country. But beyond that, if you look at Ethiopia, it's the seat of the African Union. The AU is, in theory, the ideal forum to try to strengthen protections against mass censorship, which destroys so many lives and businesses. In theory, this should be where it's happening. And if you look back a few years, the AU was a semi-effective space. I mean, we launched our cost of shutdown tool, for example, at the African Union event in 2017, 2018, I think it was, and the situation just continued to decline since then. And I think that really has to do with the fact that Ethiopia is directly involved with the governance of the AU. So you have the good, the bad, and the ugly in the space. But between them, uh, these organizations don't seem to have the teeth to do something. And in certain cases, like the AU, they very specifically remain quiet on the practice because of the people involved.
Yeah, and one of the perhaps you can also respond to this, Al. One of the issues that has really come up here is the balance between, because this is what African governments have said, that we are enforcing this, we are enforcing surveillance, or we are disrupting internet or restricting it because of the security. It's for the public good. But on the other hand, I think there appears to be some struggle between ensuring that there is conserving the public order, and at the same time not trampling on the people's online rights and privacy. How can this be differentiated here? Because are there instances where you can say the government is justified with the public order call?
Right. So we track the reasons and justifications that governments supply following internet shutdowns, and there are absolutely there's such a huge range from the ridiculous to the almost sensible sounding. Now, one of the problems that we see in Ethiopia, as well as a lot of other countries around the world, Algeria is another example, happens a lot in the Middle East as well, is during school exams to stop kids from cheating during exams, which is, when you think about it, you're cutting off an entire country because schools can't stop kids from taking their phones into the exam room. Now, this on face value just looks like a silly rule that people haven't thought through. But we've found that governments that switch off the internet to stop kids from cheating in exams will then also use it in political contexts. So we're very suspicious of this justification because it seems to just be a test run for the political shutdowns that happen days later. And we've seen that pattern completely in Ethiopia, for example. First, the school shutdown comes, then 2 or 3 days later, the political shutdown comes. So very dubious. If we look at security arguments, can switching off a region or a country help quell violence? All research seems to point against it because what happens is that when people can't express their views online, is that they go out on the street and essentially they militarize. And you can argue that that's not a great approach, that people should stay at home and sit tight, but it's in human nature to want to communicate. And switching off communities seems to actually increase violence and increase conflict between communities. Now, there may be a context in a very specific and very small area, say the size of a building or a street, where a disruption has to be imposed due to an ongoing terror situation or a crisis that actually is very clearly defined and time limited, and that would have to be looked at. But beyond very specific cases, for example, the risk of a detonation within the space of a few hours based on very direct evidence, we haven't actually seen a disruption that is useful. And we are looking around because we want to hear those both sides of the argument, and we just haven't seen it.
Yeah, because that is essentially what is being placed outside there, that there is a public order and it must be conserved, because the inability to do so, then perhaps that may be exposing governments to consequences. I want to bring in my colleague is Geoffrey York. Geoffrey, I don't know if you requested the mic to ask the question. I don't know if he's here. Geoffrey York is the Africa correspondent for the Globe and Mail, Canada. I don't know if he's here, but if I can't get that question, I think he's here. Geoffrey, I've sent you the request. So you can just click that mic on your bottom left and then you'll be up here because we are winding up in the next 5 minutes. I've sent you the request, just accept it and you'll be here, Geoffrey. But as Geoffrey comes, I want to give our panelists last chance to make their closing remarks briefly so that we can call it a day. Let me begin with Tekle.
Yeah, thank you, Kennedy and NetBlocks for organizing this. I'm really grateful for that, and I see this as an opportunity for presenting alternative space for presenting the voices of people that have been suppressed in the main event, the IGF event, and thank you for that. And I also hope that this kind of events continue and we get to share our afflictions and pain. And I think that there must be concerted efforts to pressure governments to end blockades like the ones we see in Ethiopia and other countries. And there must be sort of like citizen-based engagements across borders to work together and pressure governments to ending blockades and problems like we see. And when it comes to Tigray, please keep it on the headlines, keep it going, because we have millions of people under blockade, and like we don't know where our families are, if they are alive, or if they have been victims of all the atrocities. Please keep Tigray on the top of the agenda. That's what I would say, and thank you.
Thank you, Tekle. Mabel,
Thank you, Kennedy. And so what I really want to stress is that when governments are allowed or regimes are allowed to do things like blackouts, telecommunication blackouts, internet shutdowns, it then allows them, and when they're allowed to do it without any type of accountability, they then feel comfortable and are essentially allowed to do other forms of crimes against their population. For instance, the Ethiopian government is not just doing a telecommunications blackout, they're using starvation as a weapon against Tigrayans and against other Ethiopians, not just within Tigray. If you look throughout Ethiopia, there are millions of people starving. In the Oromia region, there are millions of people starving. The Ethiopian government is now comfortable using starvation as a weapon. They have used starvation and famine as a tool for negotiations. That was the number one negotiating tool in the cessation of hostilities. And so when a government is comfortable with using things like a shutdown, they will then use other things to hurt their population. And so it is really, really important that the world holds every type of government that does things like this accountable. Accountability is one of the most important things that the world needs. And if we continue to allow governments to shut down internet, then what we'll see are situations like what's happening in Iran, where the 15,000 protesters are being quote unquote executed because they protested. Internet shutdown is The internet is not just something that's new and something that is exciting. It has become a right. It becomes a human right that we all need to use to survive in our everyday life. And so having it shut down for 2 years is something that is unexcusable, and the Ethiopian government needs to be held accountable for it. Otherwise, they'll just continue to commit crimes against their civilians. Thank you so much for allowing me to say that and for allowing me on the stage today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. I think we are unable to have Geoffrey ask the question. Let me just check if he may have written somewhere here before I ask Abstoker to close this for us. Let me see if he has written somewhere. Not yet. So not yet. So unlikely that we are going to have him to ask that question. But allow me to come to you, Alp Stoker, to make your closing remarks.
Yeah, I think Isaac has just got something to say, and then I'll dive in.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you, Candy, for the amazing hosting. I hope ungovernance forums become a tradition because, oppressive governments obviously aren't going anywhere, and we need these kinds of platforms for our voices to be heard. It's important to provide a space for people to speak freely without constraints of multi-stakeholderism. IGF is all about multi-stakeholderism, but it always works for the benefit of government bodies instead of citizens who need these platforms the most. So let's keep connected. Networks will continue to monitor internet connectivity around the world and create a space for this conversation. Internet access must be seen as a fundamental right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ismata. Alp?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this has been amazing. It's been such a brief session in some sense, but I just feel that we've all become more connected, and we've all learned so much. I think that right now, the whole concept of internet freedom is changing. This term, it's almost obsolete, or it's experiencing a transformation, and free speech itself is changing as different groups use the concept of free speech in different ways. I think we have to find a way to find common ground, and this is how we're going to do it. Netblocks will keep monitoring. We'll monitor internet shutdowns. We'll monitor storms, hurricanes. We will monitor and protect that right to connectivity, and we're so glad to be doing it with you. We also are excited to say that we want to keep the Ungovernance format going, and we want to keep this conversation going. So please follow each other, have a look through the list of participants in this space, and just try to connect and use that hashtag IUF 2022 even after we've closed this space, because we'll be back. And thank you very much to all our speakers, all our participants, especially Kennedy for pulling this all together and moderating. So yeah, cheers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alps. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where we end this. We've been discussing Internet and Governance Forum 2022, organized by NetBlocks, which is a global... Wow, nice. Which is a global watchdog organization that monitors cybersecurity and the governance of the internet. Of course, NetBlocks also has what it refers to as coastal shutdown. This is a data-driven online service that enables everyone, including journalists, researchers, advocates, policymakers, businesses, and others, to quickly and easily produce rough estimates of the economic cost of internet disruptions. So this has been a dialogue on issues of internet censorship, rights online, surveillance, privacy, and community-centric governance approaches from the heart of the internet community, because again, we have to adapt to the new challenges. On the panel, of course, I had Mai Bell, who is a leading human rights advocate and internet freedom activist, and also co-founder and president of Tigray Action Committee. I've also had Elena, who is a research manager from cybersecurity company Subshack, investigating digital freedom and privacy statistics, including the Internet Shutdown Tracker, which enumerates internet mass censorship cases. But of course, our host, NetBlocks. Here we've also had Alp Toka, who is the founder of global cybersecurity and connectivity watchdog organization NetBlocks. Of course, we've also had Tekle, is also a research fellow at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and is also expert on SDGs and conservation politics in Africa. Lastly, we've had our very own Isaac Mata, who is the director of research at the NetBlocks. Glad having you all, and thank you so much for finding time to come and share with us. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have yourself a lovely day. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Take care. Until next time. Bye.